right, this is going to be not another episode. It's the first episode of a new show, technically the pilot, but not really, because unless someone does something really crazy. So yeah, it's the idea I'm saying that. Like, I'm the one who do something crazy, wouldn't I, historically? But the point is, unless something drastic happens, there will be more than one episode. It's not really a pilot in that sense. There's no executive guy with a big cigar. I don't know if this is what I want on my network, LFN. And spoiler, I also co-own LFN. And I didn't tell these guys this directly, but realistically, the real name of this show before it became Shut Up and Scale was Untitled Project to crowbar working with Peter Dunn and Nymaera into a show. Since I've already worked with Peter on Best Damn League Show.
We're meant to pull the curtain back later.
I know.
We pull
That's
it
my
back
style,
later,
though.
now.
Exactly. My style is as soon as you come into the Wizard of Oz thing, I'm like, I'm just the guy behind the curtain pulling levers. Like, that's my style. So obviously I did Best Damn League Show with Peter, but for reasons I won't go into, basically, like every other show on our network also talks about LEC. It just was like, the perception was it was cannibalising some of the other viewership, and it was like spreading everything out. And also, if you notice, it's a lot harder in the modern day to get big name guests because there's about 1 day a week people don't scrim, so it's just impossible to get a guest. Then with Nymaera, obviously I was doing something inside for a while. Listen, I won't say anything about that. I'm not actually, believe it or not, always the big boss. I'm not Cooper in this sense. Sometimes I'm just a sub boss, so I have my own say within things. I thought maybe that could have continued. It didn't. All that matters now is, as long as
it was
he's
a
here,
wonderful time.
Exactly.
I enjoyed it a lot.
It was like a beautiful summer that had to end eventually, but we'll always look back fondly. And now, spoiler, you're on this show, so problem solved. It's all good. So what I had to think of was, what show concept could I come up with that we could all do? And I think this is actually a pretty good one. So the reason it's called Shut Up and Scale will explain the premise. So a bit like on Best Damn League Show, one thing I do enjoy, it's actually something Maui Snake put me onto in Counter-Strike with my show I do with him, was sometimes when you do a lot of talk shows, so too many of them are freeform and they just go everywhere or anywhere and they're just a convo. One thing he introduced me to was coming up with a specific structure. So famously on that show, we did the good, the bad and the ugly. Obviously Nymaera did an episode too. So I wanted something a bit like that, because I know for people like Peter, if they can come with an idea prep, they can put more time into it. Can they really think about all the angles? Not the sort of person you want to just throw something out of nowhere. So the idea for this show, why it's called Shut Up and Scale, is it's simultaneously, we're bringing a topic. We're each going to bring one topic each, and then we tell each other a couple of days in advance so each person knows what it is. Not like the other format where it was like you're sort of surprised by it, because actually there's diminishing returns to that. And then also, you, the fan, can submit some topics. So I've already actually got a couple that I took out of the LFN Discord. If you subscribe to the LFN Discord, there's a channel in there where you can put in Shut Up and Scale topics. We pick the ones that are interesting. We're only going to do a couple of those to round out the show. So a quick explanation. The reason it's called Shut Up and Scale is, one, the scale part was actually Nymaera's idea, because obviously a bit like scaling, we get extra time to prepare for this, don't we? We can think through what we're going to do. We've got the time to sort of like use time and study to our advantage. And then the shut up part, I needed to be catchy, and my joke is, nobody on this show ever will shut the fuck up, will they? This is the show of the three people who endlessly talk, and if anything we have to wait and go, your turn now. Like, that's just how we do it. So there you go, you get the whole premise. So let's just dive straight into the first aspect, which is, what's beautiful about this, gentleman, is normally we're supposed to, on my shows, remember, lead with like a spicy topic. They're all spicy topics, because why else would anyone bring it up? So I think this one actually is the one that we should start with. I think we're going to start with this topic that was a fan-generated one that you guys picked out. I thought this was a pretty spicy one, though. So a fan said, and I don't actually have the fan's name written down right now, I'll see if I can find it while we're talking. The fan said, Blaber and Razork are often grouped together as mechanical, aggressive junglers who seem to live and die by their engages. While they've reached individual peaks domestically, they often collapse in playoffs and international competition. It is clear they are resistant to or have struggled to transition into a more cerebral or supportive jungle play style. Their prime years are well behind them now. Why have they not evolved, essentially, is the gist of this question. So who wants to take this first? Where are we going on this one? Obviously, two names that could be divisive, I believe.
Want to go first, Nymaera?
I absolutely can. I was actually going to wait and see if you wanted to talk, to shut up and scale. I think we're both going to shut up. Okay, so Razork is probably the easy one of the two of these for me to triage. Obviously, I've been way more involved with LEC, and I've actually spoken to people who've worked with Razork a lot more. Blaber, we'll get onto a little bit, because while I think there are some connections between why I think the two of these players have peaked in some metas in some seasons past, I don't think they come from necessarily exactly the same root cause. The thing about Razork, I think quite clearly is, from what I've heard from, at least from the in-houses that we saw a couple of years ago. I think that's a really good place because, again, the way that we want to do the show is like bring some stuff in terms of like quote unquote evidence, right? So you guys can look back at this too. If you can find any of the streams or the VODs from the in-houses, which happened a few years ago when a lot of the international events were happening in Europe, it was really interesting listening to Razork in those. And I think that I gained a lot of knowledge about his character from that because I got to sit in on them, I got to watch the gameplay. Because Razork was very, very quick to pick up on openings happening within the next like 30 seconds, saying, "Oh, this guy's overextended. There's a respawn happening here. I think there's a gap in a vision here. I can go for this play." I really liked how he used that bit of the game. And I think we can see how effective that's been for him in terms of his, I'm going to call this like his tactics of the game. There's a difference between tactics and strategy. Tactics is like on your own screen, in the here and now, how do I win a fight? Strategy on the other side is actually thinking about the bigger picture and wondering actually, you know, do I need to take this fight even if I can win it? Or rather actually, do I need to conserve something here so I can have a bigger fight later on? So one game which I'd use for example of this, which was really good in terms of like his snap playmaking in the short term was regular season game G2 versus Fnatic Spring 2024. There's a really good series of plays around mid jungle where, again, you know, when you're against like Yike Caps, you're expecting to lose mid jungle, and they did really, really well playing Poppy Talia versus, I believe it was Lisa and Ari. Obviously a good matchup, but the way that they played it in terms of snap decision making was really, really interesting to me. So the main positive I see about Razork, because I think that's really important to see where the natives come after, is I think he's very good at short-term decision making, which sees something happen within the next minute of play. Where I think that falls down is I don't think he thinks very well beyond the next minute. I don't think he's very good at planning in advance to see where is the Pantheon ult going to go to affect an important side lane. I don't think he's always very good at seeing actually, I can click on this guy in a team fight, but actually where does he get to bring me to after that? That's the famous thing with this Malachi and the Vi is that he clicks on someone and actually doesn't really see the step 2 and 3 after that point. And to be honest, there are enough clips of you looking at his Vi and Malachi. I think there was another regular season game in 2024 actually where he was like on the Vi. Went for like a huge play in bot lane, just gets dragged out of position despite a winning moment for that beforehand. And I think that becomes much more important the higher level you get, because strategy is always going to take over tactics after a certain point against good enough teams, because your individual brawn very rarely overcomes things at the very top level. So that is my thesis statement for why I think Razork at least has fallen off. We'll get onto Blaber in a little bit, but on Razork, I think that's the big point.
Go on then, let's do it one by one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's smart to go with Razork first. I think the best way to do this, probably, rather than having a VOD on the screen, I think that may be a bit nerdy for some of the people who want to watch. But I think maybe we'll put in the comments. Some
description box or something.
Yeah, description box, or maybe I'll do a reply on the YouTube comments. But basically, I think starting with Razork is smart. And I think that the way that you describe snap shot calling is really important, because I think in every single team, and the reason we see this with aggressive junglers who manage to adapt their game, such as Peanut, versus aggressive junglers who don't manage to adapt their game, right? I think the best way to think about it is in terms of, in every single team, you have a shot caller, or you have a shot calling structure. But there's two types of shot calling, and I think this is the big gap that fans sometimes miss. You have like structure shot calling, and you have what you call snap shot calling, which I think I'm gonna use myself, right? Like it's the ability to make calls in the instant, and it's the ability to provide structure. And having players who can do both is very, very rare, right? I've worked with 50 players in my career, and I think there's like 2 players who I know who are capable.
By the way, don't you always say, Peter, this is the thing that actually it's taken us all a long time until this Vitality roster, that it turns out neither Kazi or Humanoid are fraud shot callers. They just sort of do one component of it each or something. Isn't it something like that?
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say Humanoid is one of those.
Fair enough.
Humanoid is one of the few players that I know who is capable of both doing the structure and doing the snapshot. Right. And I think that it's weird because Fnatic fans will always say, Humanoid and Razork could never play together, right? But the thing that, if you listen to Fnatic's comms, and they put, we saw the in-houses, like Nymaera said, but Fnatic are very diligent in posting all of their what you call them, all of their
VODs
the
mic checks and comms and stuff. Oh, VODs, radio.
Yeah. No, they're sorry, not VODs. They're shot comms. They're
voice comms.
In the videos, right? And you look at, when was Razork playing his best? It was when other people were providing the structure. When he was playing with Trinity. what would happen is Trimby, if you listen to the comms, he's like dominating. Trimby's speaking like 80% of the time in those Fnatic comms, right? But when Trimby wasn't there, you've kind of forced Humanoid to come and play this structure for Razork, so that he could just go and do all of the snapshot calling, and it took away Humanoid's agency to be able to do the snapshot calling.
Right.
Because whenever you saw games where Humanoid was doing snapshot calling, nobody was providing structure at all, right? Unless they had Trimby, and that's why Fnatic with Trimby did well. You always needed somebody to provide the structure. And you can see this now with Humanoid on Vitality. Why do Vitality look so much better? It's because he's providing the structure that they weren't able to get before. Why is Linkus so much better? Because Linkus now, actually, he's on a team where he has somebody providing him structure, so he can go and focus on his on his game, on his individual decision making, right? He doesn't have to provide.
Can I jump in on this real quick, actually? Because there's some really interesting stuff. Because actually, funnily enough, I did note down this too, and I thought I was speaking too much when I mentioned it earlier.
Sure.
But one of the big things this is a knock-on effect of is typically within Europe, the big shot callers didn't come from jungle; they came from mid lane or support.
Yes.
And basically, if you're not on a team with caps or in the past perks, you were in a big load of crap with that. And ever since we had, Hilly go up, well, Hilly was in a bit of a weird spot, right? Because again, he was very different in the way that he did comms. But players like Mithy, players like Yellowstar back in the day, those were the people that were the big voices. And I actually think, well, when we lost Trimby, Mickey was a bit weird with his strategy as well, because again, he's not really a leadership archetype. Yeah. Europe hasn't really continued the lineage of shot calling, particularly from support. It's meant that junglers have had to pick up the slack, and they haven't been prepared for that.
By the way, I can even say, I'll add one more old school, and Rated used to do it too, whereas I'll give you the contrast, and Pete will know this because he worked with him. It's actually a myth that Jankos was a shot caller. He actually tried to do it when he was in Peter's Regs, but he himself was a follower, even though he was a brilliant jungler, absolutely.
Yep. And I think the Mickey point is good, right? This is the reason why SK seems so directionless, right? When Mickey was at his best, he was either playing with caps or he was playing with perks.
Yes.
Slight
cheat code.
Fnatic as well, but but the point is always he's had a shot calling mid laner, right? He's never had to be the primary voice, and that's no flame on Mithy, right? Sorry, not Mithy, on Mickey, right? There's plenty of players who do one of those things and specialize in that area insanely well, right? You think about a historic example of one of the best structured shot callers you could ever imagine. Niski, another perfect example, right? There's no shame in not being able to do both, and in fact, people trying to do both really dilutes their possibility. We talk about Jankos. Jankos, snapshot caller, insane snapshot caller. When he was on Heretics, he kind of had to learn the structured shot calling, and he was never insane at structured shot calling because that's not his natural game. He developed it. By the end of the time he was on Heretics, he was maybe a 7 at it, but I don't think he was ever a 10 out of 10 of it in the same way that a Perks or like a Caps is, or like a Faker is. So this kind of thing with Razork, that's kind of what he needed. And the problem with Razork is his structure is, especially in the mid game, is completely garbage. You just look at the last 2 weeks of LEC, and we'll put these VODs in the comments. But there's one game where he plays the second game against SK. SK have Zed. He's on Nocturne. He has this insane advantage. I think his Rumble is 4-1 in the top lane. He's on Nocturne. He's 2-1-3. The entire game should be completely won. And all they need to do is properly set up objectives and play the side lanes properly, because you have a fed Nocturne, you have a fed side laner. Every single time you push in a wave, if you push in a wave on the same time, your opponent only has the option to cross map or to kind of defend the play. And when you retake by forcing the opponent to show themselves rather than going and face check into their vision. And they mess up the timer. He doesn't push. They greed for the tier 1 tower on top. So they have a Rumble. They have a Nocturne. They have 2 Drakes. And they greed for a side lane tower. It causes them to be late on an objective when their comp really wants to be first on the objective, because they're playing like a Yunara Lulu comp. They just want to hit the front line, and whenever you try to engage on one side, and you try to flank them, Nocturne is just going to kill your flanker. You try to play front to back, and the Yunara is just going to...
That's a whole lot of dominoes.
Yeah, exactly, right? So as long as you have first objective set up, you can never lose a fight, right? Secondly, you should always have first objective set up, because you have push in the side lane and you have Nocturne, so it's impossible for the enemy team to get first set up, right? If you push your side lane properly, unless they're willing to bleed 3 or 4 waves, right? Then maybe they can get a setup, but maybe then you shouldn't contest the setup. You just take the tower on the other side of the map, right? And he does the only play that causes them to not be able to get the setup, right? Because he greeds for too much on the side. Just another quick example, that there's another game from Na'Vi where he just instead of playing side lanes, super fed on Wukong. They should easily win this series. It's game 3. I think he's like 4-0 on Wukong. All he needs to do again, push the side lanes, play with your numbers advantage, and he just doesn't do it. And he has no discipline in that regard, doesn't play with his side laners, and with Humanoid, it was able to work because I know what Humanoid is like. Humanoid, if you don't listen to him about how he's playing his side lanes, he's gonna he's willing to flame you in comms, right? Like in a really,
and what we've noticed as well is like he will also just still do it and die sometimes too.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm still doing it, like you. And that was one of the big disconnects.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the Humanoid Razork thing, people like unfairly blame Humanoid quite a lot. Like, it's really hard to play with a jungler like Razork.
Well, it's also worth noting as well with that, they did say effectively, it wasn't really a case of either of them being right and wrong. It's about them being so different that one of them had to go. That was the reasoning they said. So even they said was like, well, there were too many disagreements, you can't keep both. That was the logic that they had.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, the problem is when Razork has been successful in his career, Razork was considered a mid-tier ERL jungler. Then he played with Milika. Milika. And this guy, super demanding mid laner, calls jungler to mid every single time, wants a jungler to play through his side lane. And these two, Razork and Milika, played super, super, super well together in ERLs. Right? And that's how Razork ended up going to LEC. He then played with VTO, same, very, very similar style of player. And then he went into Humanoid, right? And I think Humanoid is a bit more nuanced. Like, Humanoid's a bit more nuanced in his shot calling versus VTO and Milika. But now that he doesn't have that voice, because Vladdy is not that guy, right? Vladdy is not the one to micromanage your map setup, right, in the mid game. Now Razork looks really, really rough. And I think that's the problem with Razork. Razork never developed kind of the structure in his understanding of the game, the structured shot calling. Right, and you look at somebody like, I use Peanut, I'm sure there's many other examples, but Peanut is the one who we have the most voice comms from. Like, Peanut, at the start of his career, was always the type of guy, go, 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 right, on rocks. I think it was Gorilla, right, and Prey who were
he was there. He was that shot caller, Gorilla.
He was the snap shot caller. Gorilla and Prey were the one who were providing the structure. But as he went later on in his career, he learned to come and develop that structure. Right?
Actually, thinking about that Rocks Tigers bit, actually there were a lot of very vocal people. That was a very special thing about that team because Smeb was a really big voice in that team too. Prey was always very intelligent about it. So actually, if you have because Peanut came in as like a young hotshot rookie, right? And he came in and he had to learn a lot of skills. He started out as the aggressive mechanical, the battle warding jungler. Now he was the grandfather of battle warding. And he was allowed to do that because his team gave him so much good information all the time. Like, that team was just so coordinated. Still one of the best team play teams of all time. Like, it's incredible what they did back in 10 years ago now. They were so far ahead of the game.
Anything left on Razork? Come on, wrap it up.
Oh yeah, sorry, I fully agree. Has never had these, like, he's never learned these things in the same way that Peanut has learned this thing. We could talk about Peanut for years, right? But you look at Peanut as an example of somebody. Why was Peanut able to enjoy such longevity in the game? It's because he was able to go from this snapshot caller, which almost all rookies, except like Inspired, are like snapshot callers, into developing the more structured, the more nuanced approach. Razork, you can see he's never developed this, and that's why that's a problem, and that's something that Fnatic have to fix, and multiple coaches have failed so far. So, maybe he just can't develop it. As for Blaber,
let's do that separately. We'll just do Razork first, then we'll go back. What I'll do on this is, in general, because we've all obviously talked so much, I won't repeat things people have said. So the brief version of this would be, for me, with Razork, is I actually think he has had a tortured career, not through the fault of Humanoid, but because they both got that incredibly unlucky timing where Humanoid's contract was so enormous that it's very unlikely you were going to move him on. And so they just stayed together for too many years. And that's another reason why, unfortunately, I don't think he developed. I mean, one thing I have to speculate, I wasn't in any of Humanoid's teams, but from talking to his teammates and coaches over the years, one of the strange things about Humanoid is every coach and player I know tells me, he's got a brilliant vision of the game, he's really smart, he usually understands what was happening in it, but then they also tell me he's got a really strange personality where he can be a little bit aloof and he just sort of expects you to figure things out, and he's not the guy who'll sit you down right, I'm going to give you a lecture. He's more the guy who'll maybe tell you it once, and if it went in one ear and went out the other, then tough shit, c'est la vie, it moves on, and in a way he's on to the next game. So that that doesn't really sound like the ideal person to develop. Where what we're really talking about Razork here is he kind of was like the ultimate unpolished gem, and the real problem is he never got polished even to this day. We just left him and went, well, look at the shine on this gem, though. It's like, yeah, but we never actually worked on it. And so the saddest thing is, the reason why I used to hype the fuck out of this player in like the early days of Fnatic was, bro, there was a few years where he looked like he was like the best jungler in the whole league, if not like the best player in the LEC. But part of the reason why, unfortunately, I feel like he didn't develop is it was incredibly one-dimensional how he did it, though. Like, this guy might be the best front runner you're ever going to fucking see in your life. If he gets on you early, like one area, by the way, he looks like a genius is, he has an unbelievable ability to find ganks that don't exist. Like, there was metas where people even said the meta now means you can't get a gank off in like 10 minutes. This guy would find one at minute 5 every time, I feel like. You know what I mean? And so if you were his laners, you could see why early on you'd be loving this guy. This would be the ultimate guy to play with. We're going to accelerate the game. I'm going to be heading lane. I'm going to get ganks off. But the problem is, I'll give you a conscience, since I know you guys all watch the LPL. I'll tell you the player that has the strengths of Razork, but none of the weaknesses. It's fucking Tian from Top Esports. Tian has the same profile. Brilliant early game jungler. Can come in with like super like aggressive mechanics. Clearly like Razork, by the way, plays off field. But here's the difference. One, Tian also, because he's the fucking top LPL jungler, has shit hot team fighting. Razork has always had mad questionable team fighting. I've always thought he has to get his ganks off early, because in a team fight, he's the guy, if he's playing Nidalee, he just goes straight in and gets 100 to 0 and he's done immediately. Like, that can happen. He didn't have that thing that, like, you think of people like Jankos, these are wonderful team fighters. Then also, Tian also has the ability, because he's played in such an insane hostile environment for junglers. Difference is, if he does get behind, though, he can make a smart switch up. He can change some things. That's where Razork, I always felt, in the same way he's the best ahead, he's one of the worst I've ever seen from behind. Like, if he doesn't have the tempo, if he doesn't have the edge, if he doesn't have basically the ability to kill you directly on his screen, I feel like he has always been a little bit lost. So for me, yeah, that's the biggest problem, I think. Is, and then lastly, the other thing I'll throw out there is, if you want to contrast him with a jungler who was the perfect example in Europe of switching from mechanical gank artist to general cerebral junglers, Jankos, isn't it? And if people don't know, Jankos essentially had all the weaknesses of Razork as strengths. Like, he was probably the best cover jungler ever, so he doesn't have to be there first, he just gets there in time. But everyone says he had the best comms of any jungler ever. Like, he could just communicate both what he's seeing, what he's doing, and what you're going to do at the same time, like almost on some didgeridoo shit, like while he's playing the game, he can just do that at the same time. And then lastly, he's clearly a guy that didn't need to, like, sort of feel like I'm ahead in the game. He can just like figure. I've always felt like Razork also feels like the ultimate panic jungler for me. If something went wrong, or if it's why he just sends it, bro. For good and for ill, he just sends it.
With the Baron Steel versus KeSPA like this last week, right? He definitely has aspects of that.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I fully agree. Yeah.
Is there anything more to say about Razork? Should we go to Blaber? I think that's pretty fast. I think we've been quite reasonable. Yeah,
and I hope that's like a good look into like some of the other sides of it. Especially, I love the comparison to Jankos, because he was like the first Blood King back in 2014. He also evolved out of that too. So I suppose we should move on to Blaber.
Also, by the way, I even used to joke about both these players. I used to compare them myself on talk show. Maybe that's where the fan thought of it from. I always used to say for both these guys, so this will apply to Blaber too in a second, but this is why it's actually sort of a backhanded compliment. I always used to say Razork's problem is he was born in Spain. He should have been born in China. But here's why that's both a compliment and a diss. Because like what I just said about Tian, brother, if you really had only ever gone in, we had a guy called, it was called MLXG. His reason he didn't stick around. The problem is, if you had been in the LPL, they would have made you develop. You'd have gotten with a Doinby, you'd have gotten with some Mako, you'd have had some guy who'd have learned to sort of like polish these rough edges off. And then, but the saddest thing really, the final thing to say about Razork is, he actually could have been such a greater player. He's already very talented, but he could have been like one of the absolute best we've ever had.
Yeah. We'll see where he goes as well, because I think his time on Fnatic perhaps is coming to an end. I don't know how they continue with him, so maybe that's a conversation we can return to on this. So we should probably move on to Blaber on the other side, because I actually really want to hinge on to what you were talking about in terms of like you should have just been born in China, because I think that's really relevant to someone like Blaber, because one of the biggest things that I have noticed speaking to professionals from Europe, from North America in terms of the pro players, compared to players which you hear in the interviews about LCK and LPL, is the understanding of game knowledge outside of a player's role is very low in the West compared to that in Korea and China. And I think this applies a lot to Blaber, because I think Blaber is excellent at viewing things through a jungle lens. When the game is about a jungler, this guy is it. He is so good. And I think this also applies to Razork to a certain degree too. But I think when Blaber has interesting outside of the typical happenings in his lanes, sometimes that can really mess with what's happening to him, where someone roams into his jungle that he wasn't expecting, because he's got the level 1 jungling down. We saw that this split year and this year, right? Because we saw from players like Skewmond, who's fantastic, by the way. That's another person we need to talk about European junglers at some point in the future, but we've gone on that too long. The meta from first stand coming into this split was very much about, what are you doing with your level 1s? What are you doing with your first resets? How do you view the game through a jungle lens? And I think that's one of the things that really set Blaber ahead, and he looked really good at that. Stuff like you talking about Razork's Nocturne earlier, he was also good at that too. I think Blaber's similar too, where they understand, I can walk at you level 1, I can get ahead in the jungle, this is how I get my camp advantage, this is how I stay ahead of the game, and right now, that's a great meta. Similarly, we saw that from Blaber back in 2021. It was the farming jungle meta. It was Nidalee, it was Morgana, it was Udyr, it was Hecarim, it was all of these, the chem tank junglers, the farming junglers it was Canyon's huge meta too. And in fact, this conversation is relevant to Canyon too, because he's another player who actually, despite being, I think, the greatest jungler of all time, also not the best at viewing things from outside the jungle role in terms of the perspective. So actually, this is not just limited to players like Blaber and Razork. I think there are players who view things through a jungle lens, especially because from about 2018 to 2021, jungle was the most powerful role in the game, by far. They farmed like nothing else. Conqueror as a room was super busted. They could just get 1 million XP. It wasn't great for them for ganking all the time, but someone like Blaber was so good at getting ahead of that. And of course, the game which I'm going to reference is a team, on the other side, a team one of my very favorites of all time, Detonation Focus Me in MSI 2021. This is a great way to get inside Blaber's head, even at his peak, because he fought for a very important Scuttle Crab in the very first few levels of the game. And he thought that he would have top prior because he had Jason to Gnar. However, it was Ebby, of course, player, which is very dear to both Peter and myself as well, took Halo Blades Gnar into Jace, something which you didn't see in the meta, which meant that Jace didn't have the push at that level, which meant suddenly Blaber was in a 2v1. He flashed for the crab, got it, but he died. And that set him behind the entire game. The whole game plan fell apart and things went to crap off of that. Those things, as much as the players which I like to joke about because I've got a got a bit of a rapport with them. Those things which just change outside of the jungle point of view are actually, that lane's not going the way which my top laner said it would, because he's not thought about it himself, or he hasn't seen those runes loading in. I think that's a really good way to view Blaber, because he's very, very good when things go standard in his lanes, and he can view things through a jungle lens. When it doesn't go that way, that's when I think it falls apart for him.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think it's worth saying, it's worth looking at Blaber's history, right? So Blaber really had his best, his breakout years in 2019, 2020, right? So in 2018, he was sharing time with Svenskeren on Cloud9, but in 2019, 2020, he came into Cloud9, and who is his mid laner when he's on Cloud9 in 2019, 2020? It's Nisqy. And who is Nisqy? Nisqy is the mid laner who will literally sack himself. Maybe Dolanby is like the S plus tier, but Nisqy's definitely in the S tier of mid laners who let's call them junglers mid laners, right?
The jungle whisperer is what we used to call him.
Exactly, and he got to play with Nisqy for 2 years. I think they were very unlucky. There was that 2020 spring where if they'd gone to MSI, the MSI was cancelled that year because of COVID. And this was the year G2 had done really well at Worlds, but they roll swap Perks and Caps at AD carry was really, really bad in Perks and mid. He was fine, but he wasn't Caps level, right? And I think if that Cloud9 had played the G2 with the Perks mid and Caps AD carry, I think they would have beaten those guys. But they never got to go to MSI that year. And to that extent, I think Blaber's been a bit unfortunate, kind of when he was at his peak, in 2018, like Svenskeren got to play all the important games. And then in 2019, 2020, Cloud9 were not fully developed in 2019, and then 2020 they were hit by COVID. But I think he struggled. He seems to be going on a downward trend since 2020, but I think that's mainly because, firstly, he was playing with Nisqy, who would just drop everything. Then he had a bit of a rough time with Perks, Perks is, let's call Perks the mid laner, whereas Nisqy is the jungler's mid laner. So he kind of, in the situation where Perks was able to get 1v1 advantage, I remember a LeBlanc game at Worlds. I'm pretty sure that was in the playoffs that they played to get out of groups. And Blaber was really good in that situation. He was really, really good when he's able to tunnel vision. But the problem is, now he looks worse by comparison, because what happened after 2021, Inspired came to NA. And Inspired is just better at Blaber at playing for the jungle, and Inspired is better than Blaber at playing at playing with his lanes, because he is willing to sacrifice things for his lane.
He's also a freak of nature. That guy is just.
Yeah.
How did he come out of the Western scene? He's just a freak of nature. He's incredible.
Yeah, he's a freak of nature, and he's one of those guys as well. Like when he was playing with Danny on EG, he knew Danny would struggle a little bit in lane, so he would gank for him on the right times. Danny didn't even need to say anything. He would give him cams in the mid game. He would play Trundle for him. He's like, people have this idea that he's like got this massive ego. He does have a little bit of an ego, but like he's willing to sacrifice, if he has faith in you. And I think that's the problem. Blaber looks worse because Inspired is in the league, and people have learned things from Inspired, which he hasn't learned from Inspired himself, and that's the problem, I think, with Blaber. And as a result, he's just, as the game has become less about just farming to 6 or farming to 11 or on jungle, it's become harder and harder for him to adapt. And I think that's the issue with Blaber. I will say I saw some promising signs now that I would dominate as his coach. He in Spring Split, but obviously in playoffs he just defaulted back to in the Lion series. He just defaulted back to who he was before. So I don't know how skin deep those changes are, but definitely I've seen some improvement.
I think it helps that the meta has been so jungle centric, or it can be so jungle. If you look at like Shun and Skiumond and players like Tienra, he's on incredible form right now. Like jungle advantage is so much of it, and it has been for a lot of this year, and that obviously falls into a lot to what we talked about with Blaber, like view and how he views the game we see as.
Yeah, fully agree.
Of course, you had to actually stop talking like the 2 seconds I was blowing my nose after like the rapid fire machine gun.
I did think about jumping right back.
Whatever. Anyway, it's all good. Luckily, you all did cover a lot. So first of all, I will say this. I'll do a more expanded version of what Peter did there. I actually think one of the most bizarre things about Blaber is, unlike Razork, who basically had like 2.5 mid laners his whole career, this guy had every possible type of mid laner. But actually, as a result, I'm a bit harsher about Blaber than Razork. As I say in Razork's case, he's kind of been trapped next to that huge Humanoid contract for like 4 years ago. It's going to be hard to develop unless somehow you can find some extra level to your relationship. If you think about what he had in his team, right? So when he started out, they had Jensen as their mid laner. I can tell you, fuck any of this like this. That guy doesn't even know the jungle existed. He's one of those mid laners that just stayed mid laner 24/7 because, bro, I'm getting waves and killing people. Get the fuck out of my lane. Like that's, or just, if you come, it's on the forgiven shit. You should know when to be there to kill him. Didn't you see how our lane was pushed up? That sort of mid laner. So first of all, that's actually a pretty harsh sort of learning curve to get in on. You did that. Then you got Niski, though, by the way, the dream jungler, as far as we can tell. There's a reason why. It's not a meme. That's why at the end, all of us who were like Bo stans were like, well, before we kick him completely, can we just have Niski for one split, just to see if that, like, because that's like your fucking granddad who knows how to fix every car engine. Before we take it to the scrapyard, give him one last go. Maybe he can get it started, maybe he can jump start it or change some widget or something. Because essentially Niski is viewed as the dream jungler's mid laner, like you say. Even on Perks, though, I'll go one further though, Pit. Here's where Perks is a different type of mid laner, but also I think actually helped Blaber is, bro, Perks is someone who's going to be extremely vocal about what he wants and what can happen in the game. Like, again, if we're talking like with Razork about lack of shot calling elements, that's something both Razork and Blaber clearly have suffered from. Because what I would say is this, it's not that we actually need the dream, like you guys said, to have like Pino or someone who actually be not only the shot caller anywhere, but an awesome shot caller, like one of the best of all time. Here's all you need. I'll give you the analogy. I always thought if you ever watched the career of certain AD carries, Doublelift's a very famous one, there's night and day difference between the era when Doublelift just played AD carry and hit creeps and then went into team fights, and when he learned, a bit like solo queue, if I have the lead and I have the kills and the items, actually I have to do a little bit of shot calling because I need to tell people what I need to carry this team fight or how to even get into the team fight that I want to be into. So I think there's a tiny bit of like role specific shot calling everyone has to develop at some point. I can tie this to Razork because I don't think he ever did. Like I say, I think he could get crazy leads, he could be up, he could have all the items, but I don't think at the end of the game either he necessarily knew what he wanted to do or what he wanted his teammates to do, hence why he would just send it sometimes and they would be watching. I can tell you the reason why it makes a lot of sense, sadly, that Razork and Upset didn't work out is Upset's my boy, and I can tell you right now, if you just fucking flash it and die, he's not going, me too, he's just going to be like, what the fuck is this? Like, that's not he's going to politely talk to the coach about that later. He's not going to even bring that up with you in the moment, bro. That's the wrong stuff. That was always a chalk and cheese combo from day one. But anyway, back back to Blaber. So then he had Perks, so at least if he's going to be egotistical, he's at least going to tell you exactly what he wants, though. Yeah. You could argue that's to a fault his issue that he's going to do that. So then after that, you go to, like, bro, one of the worst timed ones ever, easily, is this Giorgio Pion signing. Because you guys didn't even connect this, but let me just connect why I think that made Blaber get completely exposed. Before this, even in the ups and downs, Blaber's still a young player, though, and crucially, by the way, he's an NA jungler. That gives you massive amount of extra cachet and appeal. Because not only are you going to have fans, but we need those slots for imports. So actually, a lot of people would have said, if you could build a team around Blaber, that you can have the OP team, you can have like a sick solo lane who's Korean or something. So one of the problems he had was when he got Giorgio. Because one, Giorgio had just had inspired someone who essentially has all of Blaber's weaknesses as his primary strengths in the game, and is just constantly telling literally Giorgio and others how to play the game how he wants. Then you put him with Blaber, someone who, it seems like, essentially, Giorgio and Blaber, as far as I can tell, both need the same things and can't give them to each other. So the disconnect was clear there. I don't know that with APA it's been much better. APA's got his own limitations, and I don't ever think he's a shot caller. So I think what's funny is the humanoid one, maybe that was just the relationship didn't work. In Blaber's case, beyond when he had Niski and Perks, I also think they've just made a mistake in making rosters that didn't have a shot caller in. I remember when they got that bot lane again of Sven and Vulcan. I remember just saying, but bro, his top laner is fucking a Korean. By the way, a pretty fresh Korean too. His mid lane is APA, who plays like 2.5 champions and isn't a shot caller. And then his bot lane also doesn't have shot calling components. Like, we're not even giving this guy a chance. Like, you got to identify his weakness and sort of put someone who can either teach him that or offset it. And I don't think he's ever actually had it. So the sad thing is, even though this isn't possible, if you were trying to fix Blaber tomorrow, you would either bring in an amazing shot calling support. The obvious one to me would have been maybe he could have played with a core JJ or something like that. That would be an interesting one. I can imagine them having a lot of success. Or you need another Miski type mid laner. Bring in some guy who's got the type of game where he wants to work this way around someone, and then you can maybe do it. Because just like Razork, I also feel like here's the thing, I might meme on these people on shows. I actually think it's tragic how that these guys didn't accomplish more. They had so much talent. Like, if you compare them in contrast, right, I think Skewmon actually has amazing hands. I've always thought Inspired has average as fuck hands, bro. Like, the difference is, because his decision making's so good, you'd never notice it. You'll never see a moment it looks like he didn't do a fucking combo on someone, because he's the sort of person who doesn't put himself in the position where he has to do 17 fucking hit combo to get out of the fight. He's not that guy. That is people like Razork and Blaber. So the sad thing is, if you contrasted their raw skills, you'd assume it was people like Razork and Blaber who'd be through the heavens with all the championships but amazingly, actually, he's had an underwhelming career too.
I mean, I think part of the issue with Blaber is people have fallen a little bit for the hype, right? Where because he's considered this NA jungle god, people are like, oh, he could do anything. I can just coach him, to cover his weaknesses, right? Whereas maybe the roster considerations on Cloud9 should have been just, we have this guy who's 10 out of 10 in this. Don't make him work on his 3 out of 10 area. Just fill somebody else in the team to do.
By the way, Peter, in your case, as people might know, you alluded to it earlier. This is famously what Peter did with both. He started with Danny first and made him this ADC that didn't even have to play certain champions or a certain way in lane. Then for Giorgio, he also introduced him gradually and brought him. I feel like you would have been the right coach for this guy, mate. I feel like you would have been the one who'd have done what you just said. You'd have introduced elements that he needed to support with earlier, like scaffolding, and then over time, maybe you could take some of it away. Am I wrong?
Sure. I mean, it would have been on Cloud9 though, and
True.
How much power does the coach have on Cloud9?
That also could be an issue, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think, I mean, to be honest, from the outside, it's looked very clear that if this guy had ever gotten to play with Humanoid or he'd ever gotten to play with Caps, he would have been he would have looked a lot.
Yes. Well, there's the other irony. Maybe he should have done the Giorgio before Giorgio, and if he'd have just come to Europe and played one of these players, he'd probably solve his problem, wouldn't it? We had them all. We had a whole, like the guy with the fucking steps out with the weather coat, whatever. Is like, what do you want from the underground? Mate? I've got your Humanoid here. I've got your Niski. I've got your Caps over here. Exactly. He's got them all, mate. We've got them all in Europe. Okay, that's enough on that one. Now, obviously, listen, in some ways we've established the premise of the show because no one shut the fuck up. We scaled. That was topic one. We're not going to get through them all, boys. We're going to keep going. So we'll now move to one of our takes. I think now, Nymaera, even though this is also this thing could be like 2 hours itself. What is your topic? This is a pretty good one.
Okay, so this one I chose specifically because we have Peter on here. How can you tell if a coach is good? It's a very open-ended question. Before we went live, Peter asked me, but whose perspective are you talking about? From a team's perspective, from a player's perspective, from an amateur's perspective? Now, I think it's particularly interesting because it's so hard to tell from a casual's perspective to see it from that angle. But if, of course, we've got any interesting other insights on that, Peter, really interested to know actually what do you respect in other coaches, obviously being a long-term one yourself. And one of the things which has really led me into this kind of thought process and why this question was very interesting to talk about too is because I think it's really hard to tell what a coach's role even is in most teams in League of Legends, because we have ones which are facilitators, we have coaches which are basically glorified scrimbookers, we've got people who genuinely are people who determine the identity of a team. They are these draft gods, they are great, they understand the theory of the game. And so many coaches are so different from each other, they're good in different ways. So, I thought I'd give a couple of my points first, and then obviously I'd let the question in. So what I was thinking about here was in terms of, well, okay, what can you use to tell a coach is good in general? Well, you need a little bit of time with them first and to see stuff like that. But the things which I thought were really important about coaches in general and how can you tell if a coach is good is about stuff like, how do you adapt quickly to changes happening in the game? So there's a big catch change. How clearly do you see a different philosophy of how something's happening in a game? So, for instance, midway through Worlds 2023, we saw the change from the Genji style of play of these kind of scaling bot lanes through to the double-ranged AD carries. That was obviously a player-driven change in a lot of ways too. Now, the question is, every other team at that event, how do they change around that too? That's a big thing. One of the other things which I think was really interesting too is how do the players look like they understand competitions when they're playing them? So to get people on the same page is one of the primary roles of a coach. So one of the big things I think about there is, there are clear win conditions and loss conditions for a team. Do they look like they understand them? So for instance, BLG last year, I don't think they did look like that. When I saw them play a bunch of games, and even actually at the very start of this year, one of the videos I think you should really go back and watch is first round robin of BLG versus JDG in the first split of this year. BLG had a huge lead. I believe it was an Azir game from Knights. They did a really good job of playing through side lanes, playing the wider map, but BLG did not realize that they were going to lose in 5v5s. JDG did. They held on, looked for a 5v5, and it looked really good. So despite losing the rest of the game, they found their win condition. The whole team understood their win condition, and they won off of that. I think that signals a well-coached team, or at least a team that has got on the same page well. So you often put that towards coaching as well. I'll give one other example as well. In this split, so 2026 split 1, the first game of T1 versus KT Rolster in the regular season, great example of this. T1 are playing against a composition with a ton of globals. They know they need vision control, so they're trying to fight very heavily over it. KT also understand that they have a load of globals, and they need to deny that vision on the other side. So the whole game is about fighting around vision. And both teams really understand that. And I found it really fascinating seeing two teams understand, I've got to push, I've got to move, I've got to fight for vision, and then we use the globals afterwards. I thought KT looked like the best coach team in the world, actually. Look at Worlds last year into this one, similar things happened like that too. I'm actually going to stop yapping now, otherwise I'll go on for too long. But these are some of the things which brought it to mind. Like I said, it's a very open-ended topic, but I'm really interested to think of actually, from your two opinions, obviously from very different areas of the industry, to be honest, even in different games and stuff too, right? How can you even tell a coach is good, especially from someone who doesn't know them personally?
So I mean, I think that this is a question which we could literally talk for 3 hours for. But I'll try to give the Cliff Notes version of it. And I think your point about how do players understand their composition, how do players react to innovation, I think this is important. Some of it's on the players as well. Some of the players have to adapt to the meta, but the coach being able to understand when they need to step in and understand when they need to facilitate the discussion is important, right? And I think this is something which often happens on behind the scenes, but knowing when to step back and knowing when to cut the conversation short, I think is very important. But I'm going to go from this perspective, from the fan perspective, rather than from a recruiter or a GM perspective, because I think they're slightly different questions. And the first thing I will say is, as a fan, often people will think a good coach is somebody who has insane game knowledge or has a unique take on certain things online, and that doesn't necessarily make you a good coach, right? And people will say, I'm talking about LS. I'm not talking about LS, right? I'm talking about a couple of other people who I'm not going to name, but it's not LS in this situation. But why does this matter? Okay, so there are things which, as a coach, if you're coaching a rookie player, you will have an advantage over that rookie player. Let's say you've been coaching for 10 years in League of Legends. You have experience in the game, but the game adapts and changes a huge amount of time, right? If you're working at a pro team at the top level, your players are some of the people who are at the cutting edge of innovation, right? It is impossible, because you don't have enough hours in the day, for you as a coach to have better knowledge of the current innovations that are going on for runes, champions, and things like this, more than every one of your 5 players. Maybe you can, because one player is playing solo queue more and goes to the gym more, you can like know more than your mid laner. Or at a stretch, maybe you know more than your mid laner and your jungler. But it is impossible to know better than all 5 roles, because you just don't have time. There's 5, every hour that you put in is 5 hours your players are putting in, right? So a lot of your advantage in game knowledge as a coach is how is your experience in the past. But if you're a really good coach, and this is something I think I told Jojo in like the first month we were working together, is that if I have not taught you everything I know within 1 year, 6 months to 1 year, I failed as a coach. Right? Like I should be able to coach you everything I know in mid lane, because I'm going to be working with you 5 hours a day, 10 hours a day, right? So I should be able to pass that knowledge on to you, right? And then at that point, what matters more is how we then, as a coach and a player, continue on in the future, right? And if you're working with a rookie, what you can do is you can teach them how they should learn. Teach them about how to VOD review, teach them how to improve on the game, teach them how to recognize innovation, teach them how to be efficient with their time, teach them how to be disciplined, right? But if you're coach and you've been coaching a player for 3 years and you haven't taught them everything you know, you've failed, right? Like that's just the reality, right? Because you're spending so much time with them that you should be able to impart all that knowledge in a close amount of time, right? So, does game knowledge matter? Yes, of course it matters, because you can't have those complicated discussions with your players, but it's not everything, right? So what does a coach actually do? Well, the things that so obviously it's about moderating discussion. It's about recruitment. Recruitment, very, very important. It's about expectation management, internally and externally. Are we progressing? We had a very disappointing loss. How am I framing this loss? Is this a loss where we had poor discipline? Okay, I need to be harsh on you for discipline. Is this a loss where we just didn't understand? Okay, how am I going to fix these issues? It's problem solving, right? But it's also about expectation management. Okay, it's game knowledge. You need to be able to moderate discussion, conflict resolution, and staff construction. What are my strengths as a coach? What do I need from my assistant coach? What do I need from position coaches? Do I need an analyst? Do I need that kind of thing? It's kind of understanding how your structure works. Now, if you're a fan and you're listening to this, you may be thinking, "Oh, that's interesting," but don't teams have GMs? And that's the crux of the matter, because you have a lot of teams with GMs who often. So if you're a coach, you're always in the public. You're always public facing. If people want to shit on you, they will shit on you. If people want to send you like death threats, they're going to send you death threats. They don't. I would bet 90% of fans, unless you're Fnatic fans, don't know who the GM of your team is.
Yes.
Right? And often they have a lot of say over all of these things, right? So you can be, and that's where the difficulty is, right? If I'm looking to recruit a coach, and I'm a GM.
Stepping in on that real quickly too, particularly because it will depend on region. A lot of GM, so for instance, like in Korea, head coach is actually more like a managing role, actually, rather than like a strategic coach, which is often who there's like leading the game. Within Europe, general managing often deals with a lot of German paperwork. That's a lot of what they do. And sometimes they split up different roles and they have a different GM for different teams. But a lot of them will do through stuff, like a lot of like their registration stuff, making sure that you have like, your Anmeldung on whatever, like your registration papers and your pro for residence and things like that. That'll have to work for the office, have to work for LEC. I think ended up you needed to have like your company based in Berlin. So even though technically your overall organization is based somewhere else, you needed a Berlin-based company to compete within the LEC, I think, for various paperwork reasons. GMs do a lot of backroom paperwork, but that's not what a coach is there for.
Exactly. And this is why people mock the Mac being in the coach of coaches role, But I mean, that's simply, if you were talking...
Sorry for coining that, by the way. Coach of coaches is far too good.
I mean, in 2020, that's literally what, like the 2020 Mad Lions roster, right? Mac was called the head coach, but what we were using in that Mad Lions roster was literally what they do in Korea. I was the head coach, but I'm not leading scrims. I'm doing a lot of the admin. I'm doing a lot of the conflict resolution and that kind of thing. Mac is teaching the game, right? But in the West, we think, so Mac is the head coach, right? Yes, he's the head coach by what we term the head coach in the West. But there's a poor understanding. understanding of what specifically is important to those roles. You know, and people expect a head coach to like do literally everything, and there's a lot of roles that need to be ticked. Lots of checkboxes that need to be ticked, and different people can wear different hats to kind of fill those roles, right? Now, I think that some of those roles and responsibilities can be done by other people. So one famous thing, we mentioned Cloud9, like Jack is very famously sits in on every single Cloud9 scrim, or he did for many, many years. I don't know if he does it anymore. So he's doing a lot of what we would consider a head coaching career, right? He's the one who's making sure that arguments don't happen. You're not going to like go and storm out of the room when you're the guy who's, or at least that the
argument is constructive. Like arguments happen, but like not like the damn Prio conversation with Los Ratones and what happened when it wasn't coached, for instance.
No, of course, and I mean that's a thing. Like that's the advantage Cloud9 have had for years, because although Jack wasn't called a head coach, he was doing a lot of what a head coach was doing. So coaching Cloud9, you may be in the head coach, but you were doing a lot of the strategic coach role. So firstly, I think that we should get out of the mindset, first of all, that game knowledge is everything. Game knowledge matters. It matters because if you don't have like at least an LEC level of game knowledge, mid-tier LEC level of game knowledge, you cannot have the discussions. You cannot moderate the discussions. You need to moderate between the players, because you need to know when a player is talking bullshit and you to cut them off. And if your game knowledge is bad, you can't tell if they're talking bullshit, right?
This does happen in other areas in esports. It happens on podcasts. It happens on broadcasts. Where like some people just want to argue to be right after a certain while, and like that's actually important to actually realize actually this person's stressed or whatever.
It's usually an emotional question, isn't it? Rather than the specifics of what they're arguing about, yes.
Exactly. Like
by the way, the infamous Los Ratones argument wasn't actually at all about what the jungler and the fucking ADC should do. What it was about was like the fucking jungler and the ADC felt like the other person should do something, or I'm not getting enough. And really, if they actually had like a couples therapist sit down, they wouldn't even be talking about the bloody game, would they?
But you need to be able to say, so you have 25 minutes in a review. And this is how I can tell if a coach is good. If a coach is spending 60 minutes in every fucking review, I think he's a shit coach, right? Nice. Like, if I'm like a coach on another team and your reviews are all like 60 minutes, you fucked up, right? And but basically, yeah, I mean, that Los Ratones thing, you need to be able to know, do we cut the discussion and say, let's talk it out later? Do I send the rest of my team away and just keep the two players behind and we just have a talk here? Do I send maybe two players away, keep one player, to act as like a moderator? How do we discuss this topic? Do I lead the discussion? Do I let the quiet player lead the discussion? Do I let the loud player lead the discussion? How am I going to moderate to make sure the loud player doesn't talk over the quiet player? These kind of things are very, very important as a coach, and these are things fans will never see, right? But first of all, game knowledge. So game knowledge matters, but I think is overrated by a lot of fans, because that's all that fans really get to see, right? What people are posting on Twitter. Second, get out of the mindset that a coach is universally good for all situations. Tabe, who I think is probably, in my opinion, the best coach in the world, was bad in Brazil. Right, because a lot of the culture, I mean, it's true, right? A lot of the culture things that he expects from Chinese players, he just didn't get from Brazilian players. And then the way he responded, and this is public, Tabe has talked about this himself. He was like, I was too harsh on my players, right? Because I just had different expectations, and you go mega hard on Brazilian players, not always the best approach. Some players it will respond with, but generally with Brazilian players, that's not how you do it, right?
And can I throw in something in there too? Because Tabe is now coach of JDG. JDG are a famous team where they had 7 coaches, I think, 7 head coaches in 2 years. JDG, world famous organization, and you might think, well, they're bad coaches then. No, we have Warhorse, who is a world champion coach. They had CV Max, whatever you think of him, been a very successful coach, points in the Plas. Obviously, Hom was the one guy that worked for them. But over the course of like 2024 to 2026, they've had like a million different coaches, and some of them were good, some of them weren't, but the whole thing just seemed like a poison chalice. So obviously some people don't succeed in certain circumstances. That's the unsatisfying thing about this question, right? Yeah, because there will be a bunch of situations where actually like the coach is good, but you can't tell. The coach is bad, but actually you can't tell either because the players are too good to hide that. There's a bunch of situations like that.
Of course. It happens in conventional sports all the time. Xabi Alonso, football coach, probably the best one of the best coaches in the world,
Absolutely.
definitely a top 5 coach in the world. Put him on Real Madrid, where he has literal zero authority over his players, and let the players walk all over him because the management has the players back and not the coaches back. He's gonna not look that good, right? Even though like everyone knows this guy's a good coach. Even Real Madrid fans know this guy's a good coach, right? But not a good coach for Real Madrid, right? Because he has a very strict way he wants his players to play the game, and some of his best players just don't buy into that because they have massive egos and aren't prepared to be bossed around, you know? And maybe a different type of coach would have been better. Similar sort of thing, you know, if you have a team full of egos, maybe you don't want your... Okay, I'm going to say I don't think LS is a bad coach, but I'm going to use this as LS as the perfect... This is why I wanted to get out of the LS situation, right? I think LS would have been a really, really good coach on a team full of rookies, where he can, like, coach in the game. But put him in a team full of players with massive egos, they're just not going to buy in, right? Like, that was the issue with Summit, right? He just didn't buy into what LS wanted to do, and it made things impossible to progress, right? So I think that a coach can be a really, really good fit in different teams, different roles. Also, filling different roles. You know, sometimes you may be like a really great strategic mind for the game, but if you have to be the final authority, like if you are the person who has to resolve conflict, it is very difficult for you to bring innovation into the game, right? Because when players check you on those kind of things, if you have the ability to just send them home or find them or whatever, then that, if the conversation gets too heated, maybe they won't speak their mind. And that's why often I will say that Chinese and Korean teams, often the final authority is not the head coach, because there needs to be a release valve if you think that like the head coach is being too harsh, right? You have to have somebody that you can complain to, somebody that you can, that there's a release valve so that problems can find solutions other way, where you don't just go, I'm just going to say with Striker, right? Like it's very clear, like a player like 113 didn't have anyone he could go to in BDS to resolve his issues with the coach, right? Because the coach had the final authority, right? So I think those are all issues with how we come and resolve the game. How can you recognize, though, as a fan, if a coach is a good coach? Well, firstly, you can recognize if a coach is a good fit for an org, right? Secondly, it's very hard over a short period of time to tell if a coach is a good coach, right? You need to recognize them in different environments, and I would say there's 4 main things that you should check. Firstly, how they use their players. Do they use their players intelligently? Do they recognize the limitations of their players? Do they put, let's say they have a really good specialist. Let's say you have a god tier team fighting AD carry. Do they recognize that their god tier team, do they recognize, unlike TSM, that Kobe shouldn't be on the same team as Broken Blade when Broken Blade is playing Fiora, Camille every single game, and Kobe is a god tier team fighting AD carry that just literally wants an Order 1 nail Visage in the top lane to just tank things so that he can hit the front line, but instead, if they go and put him with a Fiora, Camille, like this is not modern day Broken Blade, right? This is like, that to me tells me that team wasn't well coached, because they don't recognize the players that they're hiring, they don't recognize good recruitment. Secondly, how much do they help players improve? Right? So when we're looking at rookies, it's very easy to see, but also you look at how somebody have they helped a player to moderate their game, Has Blaber, maybe some of the coaches that Blaber has worked with could have helped him to moderate the game, but maybe the coaches either don't see it or aren't able to help him improve, right? And sure, individual players are stubborn, sometimes you can't fix things, but if you see lots of improvement or moderation of game styles or something like this is a way to recognize that somebody is a good coach. If you don't see the improvement, it doesn't mean the coach is bad, but if you see lots of players improving, lots of players playing their best League of Legends under a certain coach, that tells me, okay, this guy understands, how to get the most out of his players. Next thing, jungle support setups. Definitely things like, does the team understand tempo? Does the team understand, do they have like good objective setups? So I say I think Tabe is the best coach in the world. Why do I think Tabe is the best coach in the world? It's because you look at how his support in jungle play the mid game, it's always the same, right? They always understand tempo. They always understand when they need to go 2-1-2 versus 3-1-1 versus like a standard 1-3-1 setup. And this tells me, if I see this on one team, okay, that can just be a one player doing a really, really good job. I see this on 5 teams, it tells me, okay, the coach has something to do with it. And it's harder to see it's very hard to see with AD carries. Like, it's very hard to see the improvement you make with AD carries. But with jungle and support, it's really noticeable. And with solo laners, especially in split pushing metas, rather than hard team fighting metas, it's also noticeable. So those are the things you can look at. It takes a long period of time though. But basically, don't go in thinking this coach is a good coach or a bad coach. Think that this is the right coach for this team, right?
Okay.
That's what I would say there. Also, any team that doesn't, the guy who's in charge of recruitment, it should always be clear who is in charge of recruitment on the team. Because so many times the GM will just hide behind, oh, I didn't say anything, but really they're the ones who have the final say. And I think that it's very hard as a coach if you're on a team where because you will always take responsibility for the roster decisions of your team when sometimes you don't have the final say. And I think that can really, really damage a coach's reputation. And I think this is why more and more you see more coaches being public and more there used to be a lot of trust between coaches and org, that the org will always have my back. But now you see a lot of that trust eroding, which is why so many more coaches now are giving interviews. They're doing co-streaming. They're doing like shows like this, because they don't trust necessarily that the org will have their back. So I have to show.
So that's why I'm going to be going into coaching if broadcast doesn't work out.
But I mean, I think you would never have seen Grabs give the interviews he's given about Fnatic management 5 years ago. Because Grabs has been on teams with really shit management.
He's actually arguably too vocal now.
I think he's too vocal. I think Grabs is a little too vocal. I think Melzet is also a little bit too vocal. But I think that the reasons why is because of this pattern, right? Because in the past, orgs would always have your back, but now they don't. Okay. So this is a long comment, didn't give a proper answer. Let us know in the comments what more you want.
Listen, technically you did give a proper answer. Some would say you answered every single thing you could think about involving coaches abstractly.
I knew this would happen.
I know exactly. Like the other joke is, here's my meme, and I'll start a meme on episode 1. The alternate name for this project could have been Sir, This Is a Wendy's, because sometimes at the end people are so lost in the sauce. I'm like, what was the original question? Oh shit, yeah, but Blaber, like fucking up, winding all the way back into Teddy. But Peter knows from doing shows long enough, that's his job. His job is to go, and I'm the shot caller who's like, right in now, pull back off. So it's all right, you just always go in, Peter. I'll follow you up. It's good. So here's what I would say. There's a brief answer, and obviously, yes, I'm coming at it more from a journalist / a content creator side, right? Here's the problem. When people ask the question, how do you know if he's a good coach, right? You're supposed to always say, well, you can't. But it doesn't stop there. There's not a full stop there, because the problem is people think the fact that you can't know means you can't do anything. No, you can guess. Like, that's the point. You'll never 100% know. In fact, I'll even go one further. Sometimes you might have even been in a team with this coach as a player or another coach or a figure, and you might think he sucks because, like Peter says, maybe that was the wrong personnel for him. Maybe the GM promised him one type of play and got him the other one. Maybe he has a squad that just doesn't work together. Maybe he has Humanoid and Razork. It doesn't matter how good they are individually and what they did before and afterwards. Maybe you're the one that gets unlucky and you get them in year 2 or something when they just don't even have a chance to develop and go past some of these issues. So I will say, essentially, it's a classic journalistic tool, compare and contrast. Like, one of the things you're going to do here is, one, as a journalist or a talk show person, you're going to get to talk to a lot of people who did work with these people. Now, you might think with just anecdotal, if you have 50 anecdotes and there's a through line to them, there's probably something to that. In fact, if you don't know, by the way, that's even a real journalistic technique. Pay attention, Sheep Esports. You take 2 people who independently don't know you're talking to them about that topic and don't know what the other person said, and if there is crossover, assuming you're not in the very rare scenario where there's an advanced conspiracy where they've planned to pretend to be someone like that, odds are whatever they agree upon probably is accurate or has some level of basis to it, because 2 independent people have verified that thing. I can tell you that is really useful, both in interviews, talk shows, and privately talking to people, to get a sense of who people are as players. I mean, you guys know this. I've done it not only about like people like Reckless, I've done it about Humanoid, Self, any of the interesting players that have like an enigmatic quality about them, but have some sort of character flaws. They're the sort of people I always reach out to, the old coaches, the old teammates. So some of the things Peter pointed out, but I'll go on other angles on them, is, again, you can just essentially see, like, the beauty is, the best ways to tell how good coaches are in specific details is where you have the direct contrast. Like, they take over a squad a different coach had, but it's the same squad. Then you get to see, what does he do differently with it? How does he change up even things like who they play through in the map? What did he do in the draft priority? You'll already get an obvious contrast there. Then similarly, you can do things like, assuming we're not talking about too enormous a time span, you can do things like, look, how did that player play in his previous team? How did he play in the team afterwards? And then how did he play with this guy? You'll also then get a sense of what influence is he having, what impact is he having on this person. And crucially, I think a key thing you guys have nailed, by the way, is that coaching isn't like, if we were to make like an RPG style bar system for coach wouldn't be one bar. Coach is the class, you idiot. Coach would be an entire role, and within that there'd be like 10 10 bars, and spoiler, no human being ever has gotten a 10 out of 10 on all the bars. I'd be shocked if they even got to like 9 out of 10 on all the bars. I'll give you an example. Since you guys did a great job outlining how good Tabe is, I'll give you an area where I think Tabe is unusually weak, and this is his blind spot, is despite all this strength he has, bringing teams from nothing to be contenders, getting players and put them... If you think about what happened in his last game in Anyone's Legend, that right there is one of his flaws. He will take someone like Hope and act like he has Uzi I in the draft. He might do that like that. He essentially, if you didn't watch that game against T1 in Game 5, he basically just said, hey, you know how we're actually one of the few teams that could beat T1? Let's see if Hope can do it. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Every fan watching's just like, no, what are we doing? Like, no, go on, Shanks, go on, fucking Tarzan. Similarly, there'd be the odd game where, even though in the draft, this is totally correct, if you're playing LS draft hypothetical, where it's only the draft exists and there's no player plays the game, you win the draft sometimes if you get a Sejuani. Not if your whole game's Tarzan carrying the fucking game, bro. What are we doing? Put the Sejuani there. Like, the joke in that example would be, there were literally times when Tarzan was like the only person who would play a Zed when someone else might have played a Sejuani. Yeah. Like, again, that skill set of like fit into your team can also be a really, really idiosyncratic one where sometimes it works like gangbusters, sometimes they're a bit off.
Remember the MSI Game 5 one? Remember the? Yep. I actually think that was worse. I mean, Tabe, yeah, I mean, he is the great, at least the greatest Chinese coach of all time. Guys, absolutely gold dust.
I don't have the argument.
Yeah. I mean, like Korean coaches, when you talk about, obviously, there's a lot of noise in there too. But yeah, I think that Tabe's drafts are one of his most inconsistent things. But you look at someone like Hom is really up there, but only in specific scenarios. Because Hom, he was one of the coaches. He coached he was one of the Samsung coaches back in 2014. So he's been around for a very long time. But one of the interesting things about him is that he only really came alive when it was Hom with Kanavi and 369. Because whatever chemistry they had as a trio worked really well. And obviously now Hom is on H-Elite with Kanavi, and it started out poorly, but it's working well now.
It's getting good now.
You're absolutely right, Thorin. I mean, there is definitely a sliding scale for everything. Because, as we said, the role of a coach is very, very different from traditional sports. There is no one accepted version of it. And sometimes, as Peter was saying, sometimes actually you're just there to facilitate play. Of T1, Faker is the coach. Everyone else is there facilitating around that.
Yes.
And you have to judge it based on your team.
And also, as Peter sort of alluded to, if you have something repeat over and over again, I would say a classic way you can intuit that a coach is good at coaching is if no matter what team he's in, might have very differing personnel, certain structural patterns do emerge, though, that continue on. Like, there are coaches, by the way, who not only are specialists in draft. The joke is, you didn't actually have to wait until G2 to tell Dylan Falco was good in the draft. Look at him with some of those bloody Schalke rosters, mate. He was working miracles. He was taking, like, a button and a piece of string and going, oh, there you go, there's a fucking like Eiffel Tower statue out of something that not even made out of string and a piece of button. Like, how are you doing that? It was accelerated by having the best players, obviously. And then similarly, I think another one that's actually underrated is, as Peter talks about, one of the biggest mistakes loads of coaches, content creators, fans, and players make is thinking everything is about who is correct in the game about this detail. Bro, there's so much of coaching is the opposite of that. It's actually, how do we resolve this conversation where we're never going to agree? Or even better, here's a brilliant one for you certain players out there, maybe the Inspireds of the world. Maybe you're right, but in making it so that you definitely get to win this argument and be right, you actually ruin everything about the team environment. And spoiler, even when you're right at the end, they're not going to do what you asked, mate. The buy-in is, no, it's buy-in for IGLs, leaders, shot callers, and coaches. The buy-in is the lubricant, bro. You can have the best point ever, but in this, I'll keep using the analogy, but if you're going in dry, they ain't going to fucking like it, mate. They ain't going to like it. You might be right, but they're not going to like it. Whereas I tell you what, there's coaches, you know what, I think my mate Youngbuck would even tell you, he's not even close to the greatest, like, nerd coach ever, who never detailed, but I tell you what, he was a fantastic coach at, like, sitting people down, getting through to a star player, knowing which person to take separately who feels like he's bullied in the group or doesn't speak up, and get them to give their take, and then he'd take that and he'd go to the star player and he'd make it sound like it was his issue he wanted to address, not that with the player who's the bullied one. And things like this, like, you never see any of that in a video, by the way. That'll never be in the, like, VOD review video or the vlog, because that's private stuff. But that's stuff where, even though all he was doing was essentially advanced man management, you could get a lot done with that, boys, especially in his case. If you had excellent players as well, you can win championships off that. By the way, there's one last thing I'll end on this topic, which is this. One thing I definitely will not agree with is you definitely don't know if someone's a good coach if their team wins, and they're a bad coach if their team loses. There are people, look, I will say this, if you win, you're probably at least doing something. I doubt you're a bad coaching, you're winning. But at the same time, the idea you're the best because you won, not necessarily. Again, there's a lot of elements we talked about here. And more crucially, just like as Peter pointed out, in real sports, there is almost no all-time great coach didn't have at least one problem assignment in his career or one team where it went badly. In fact, the most famous detail ever is oftentimes part of the secret of being one of the greatest coaches of all time is getting the fuck out before the end, basically. Yeah. If you stay like 2 years too long, every job becomes a nightmare, no matter who you are, bro. You could literally be any of these Pep Guardiola, the greatest of all time. Once people stop listening and once it stops working and once you don't get the players you want, everyone becomes a bad coach in that logic because it doesn't fit. In fact, there's one last thing I'll say, actually. My old friend Monty, I think his biggest contribution actually in the history of League of Legends is just what he used to do on the old OGM broadcast of explaining at the beginning of the game what the win conditions of both teams are. That is to this day, I think, one of the number one things a coach should be capable of doing, as pointed out previously in this conversation. If you can tell your team basically, not here's all our weapons, do whatever you want, but here's how we streamline the concept. Here's what we're trying to do and what our objectives are. Here's what they're trying to do and how they're going to block us. You give your players so much they can then do in the game. And you notice, if you do that well enough, it's almost like pre-shot calling.
Yeah, because you at that point, you know the structure of the game, as we replied it to someone like Razork or Blaber as well. It's become something that's a broadcasting as well.
Yes.
No idea as a color caster, I'm like, this is what you should look for in the game. If you at least narrow the vision down to what the game should be about, it makes the game so much easier to play. That's a very important thing. We have killed this topic to death.
We have.
We have been on this a lot. What are we doing next?
Right, I'll tell you what we'll do now. We'll go to... All right, here's one thing. For my topics, I decided to just do the Phil topic of what I know people want to talk about, but whatever. Obviously, every other show has done the whole ENC thing, but I actually thought there was an interesting twist that I think it was Nymaera put in the chat, which is the idea that obviously, the idea of the Esports Nations Cup and the KeSPA dispute, you can go a million angles at it on something like on KeSPA and its history and what does that mean and why would they not want this and what are the Saudis trying to come. Like, let's forget that. I thought the interesting angle the tweak you gave was, in the future, it's implied that League's ecosystem will potentially go back to having not just the Saudis, but maybe, well, I mean, ESL is the Saudis, but you know what I mean? Maybe these third-party operators from other esports games will again come in like in Season 2 and they'll run tournaments and we'll have a calendar where one day it could be like Counter-Strike where, for example, there was like 2 tournaments going on at one point in like a month or something in Counter-Strike and you have to pick which one you attend, or to attend one means you probably won't attend the other. Because actually the angle on the ANC thing I think that's missed by people is the real issue there doesn't seem to only be about KeSPA versus ENC. It seems to be that KeSPA's priority is the Asian games, and they're almost seeing this as like you'd have to like pick to go with this one, or somehow it would undercut what you're doing with the Asian games, which at the moment, at least politically, in terms of how serious it is as a thing, is treated as more important, especially by Korea, than whatever ENC is, which at the moment just looks like a fun, have the national team tournaments. But we don't really know yet if it one day will be the Olympics or if it's just going to be almost like an all-star tournament, but for countries, So I feel like that's an interesting angle. I think there is something we can go with there. So now, were you the one who had that twist on it?
I had the twist of actually is this a signal of actually, is League of Legends prepared for the open circuit?
Right. Go on.
Because this is just one conflict between a managing body and a tournament organizer. And I think a lot of people don't realize how lacking in certain areas of expertise we are from tournament organizers, broadcasters, national bodies, especially for ENC when we've got effectively national bodies being made up on the fly. We're having them made up right now.
Yes.
Now we're bringing in, people are bringing in coaches from existing teams. A lot of them got announced through Sheep Esports. Someone like Mac, obviously, which Peter knows very well, the coach of coaches, is now the coach of Great Britain for ENC as well. And I wonder whether this dispute between ENC and KeSPA is a signal that actually League of Legends is going to have a lot of growing pains. I mean, if you look back 10 years ago, we still had some issues between, say, IEM and the rest of the circuit, to the point where at the end of it, IEM effectively went defunct because the teams just bowed out. They didn't want to attend. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly the thing here, but of course there's a lot of different stuff here, and the fact that national teams are not teams, and that means that they have divided loyalties. You've just talked about it there, Thorin, in terms of, is there a conflict between ENC and something like Asian Games, which is incredibly important for a bunch of teams. In fact, we've seen this before, actually, for those of you that might not remember, but back in 2022, this was just after COVID had relaxed just enough for Vietnam to finally get involved in international play again, because they were locked out much longer than other teams. It wasn't just 2020.
Sure.
2021, they were out as well. 2022, another thing happened where effectively GARM, by far the best team within the region, they went undefeated in their region that split, bowed out of MSI to go to not the Asian Games, but the Southeast Asian Games because of national pride, because it was such an important thing to them. If we're opening up into a open circuit, we have a lot of these kind of conflicts going around. I think a lot of people don't understand. We have not even begun to see the extent of how complex these things are, for good and bad reasons. But there's a lot of complexity out there, which I don't think tournament organizers, at least on the league side of things, have ever dealt with this. Or they might have done it something within a different circuit which already had that structure in place and didn't have nearly as many conflicts. I think we're going to see a lot more conflict in the future. So that was my spin on it. And I'd be interested to know what your guys' take is in terms of, like, actually how much of this is a signal for the wider league circuit if we moved more towards it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is the combo franchise open circuit, right? If it was pure open circuit, I don't think you'd have as much of an issue, right? Like, you just play the qualifiers, you play the main tournament. The problem is that the Riot scheduling is not announced to teams. Like, often we don't, like when I was coaching, even back so we would be doing our preseason bootcamp in December, and we wouldn't know when MSI was happening. We would know vaguely what month it was happening in, but, you know, how are you going to plan around schedules, right? Because downtime is obviously really, really important, right? So I agree with you on the administrative side. Like, I don't know when I assume there's going to be qualifiers for the ENC, right? Like, but I have no idea when those ENC qualifiers are going to happen. I don't think, like, and, you know, even for third-party broadcasts, like, you know, even with something like EMEA Masters, there wasn't even, I don't think there was an English stream feed. I had to watch OTP.
This is the first time that EMEA Masters has never had, it hasn't had a broadcast for it, which is
and I mean, we're even struggling in that area, right? And I mean, to me,
actually, just quick. I know I talked a lot, but jumping in on that, a lot of that is because the tournament the broadcast opera partners that were in Europe, most of them are gone. I mean, NLC has gone defunct. LVP changed from that over in Spain. Yeah. The one which used to run EMEA Masters was Webedia. They've split up into different things. So this is part of that expertise thing. We're actually losing a lot of expertise too, because the tournament, the broadcast partners are going under.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I just watch the French broadcast because, you know, I know some of those people who are on that broadcast from back in the day, from when I was working, so I enjoy watching them. But like but I mean, firstly, that's an issue. Secondly, so I don't think we have on the calendar. I think we're going to have if there's going to be a combined franchise open circuit, we're going to need to know the dates for major events like a year in advance. You know, so that teams can plan those things, which I don't think there's enough organization yet on the esports side of League of Legends for those kind of things to be announced in advance. Like, it just seems we haven't been able to get that yet. We're not there yet. The other thing as well is, you know, for something like the Esports Nations Cup, you're going to have like a huge amount of controversy. Who has legitimacy to send the team? Who has the legitimacy to send the right team, you know? Like,
oh my God, we're going to descend back into like medieval like monarchy. But the succession to the Spanish throne.
It's funny because which French coach has the balls to drop KeSPA for Hans Sommer?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like,
Ooh, yeah,
sure.
You know, you can make an argument that KeSPA deserves it. I think Hans Sommer deserves it, but you can make an argument KeSPA deserves it. But if KeSPA has a bad summer, do you think they're going to have the balls to change the roster? Of course, they're not going to have the balls to change the roster. The thing is, the reason why this issue with KeSPA matters so much is that KeSPA at least has fan acknowledgement that they are the legitimate authority, right? So you are going to have to go through them. And frankly, like, no player is going to like risk getting a permanent ban. You know, the consequences for going to ENC as a breakaway person from KeSPA can be pretty brutal. And, you know, maybe if somebody did this in France we don't really have these kind of authorities. No. Yeah, the strong authority. But if you had a breakaway, people doing it in Spain, in China or in Korea, the fan backlash would be so bad that it wouldn't be worth it. Or maybe you could do it once. Like, even for Faker, like, I think even Faker, if he took, like, let's say 10 million...
At that point, you're basically declaring all-out war on KeSPA, so...
Yeah, you're basically declaring all-out war on KeSPA.
Like, and I don't think anyone wants that smoke. Maybe if, like, a lot of big players all broke ranks, it would lead... But even then, I don't think anyone wants to deal with that. And as you said, particularly if you're someone below that caliber, you would not. I think a lot of teams would be dissuaded from giving you a contract again, that kind of thing, right? Because I don't think they want to deal with the PR fallout from it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But this way, I'll take the final point there, like extend it one further. This is the main problem with this whole discussion is you have to do, like, as I did on Some of the Insight, like a boring discussion of the history of KeSPA, which is literally just some nerd federation of papers being shuffled and titles and all. But the problem is, it's one of those things where it's like some House of Cards / Succession shit, where if you don't actually know behind the scenes how the industry works, you're going to get completely lost with all the names. So the basic thing to understand is this. KeSPA, as far as I know, maybe it's the same in China, I'm just not as well versed, is the only real governing body that exists in esports like sports, as in it literally is like FIFA or UEFA in their respective domains, where they have total say and control and the hierarchy built into them at the top. Because what people don't know about KeSPA is made up of people from the giant teams within Korea. It is made up of people in the past from like the TV stations, etc. It then even sometimes had like direct ties to the government or people from the government, like honorary positions on the board. So the point is, this stuff all coalesces around Korean business, how it works. And the reason I bring up the government part is, right, it's not only just that you couldn't like defy KeSPA. Spoiler, if KeSPA says we are not actually having a team in the ENC, I do not believe you will see a professional player play there. I think you will see people who either will never play in Korea, like they play in Brazil right now and they're from Korea, or like they might even do that thing where it's like someone who's ethnically Korean but he lives in another country and has the passport. So like you'll see essentially like amateur players, funnily enough, even though KeSPA actually has ties to this, a bit like that IESF tournament that's run for all these years, but if you ever look it up, you'll never know any of the players. Like maybe there's one Super Old Season 4 pro that played for Romania. That's about it. You're never going to say. You go on the Gamepedia, the links are all red. There's not even a fucking page for those players because they're amateurs. It's outside the purview of the Riot circuit, and they don't bring even challenger level players and have them play that tournament. So the reason I bring this up is, and the reason I don't think you will see anyone step out of line if KeSPA sort of says we're boycotting this tournament is, not only would it be a disgrace within the industry, I could even imply they might actually be able to like get the government to legally make an injunction you are not allowed to play. Because remember, to be a professional, you must have a license from KeSPA to play in their tournaments. That's a real thing. Like what would happen is if you went as a Westerner, the teams just have access to grant extra ones. You know, they'd just give you one essentially if that ever happened. Maybe it happened to the Lazy Field guy. I should probably look into that. Actually, it would be interesting to find out. So I think I don't have too much more to say. I will just say this: the reason why I think this would actually happen in the future, though, a lot more than even in other games, is because in most other games like Counter-Strike, Korea's not a particularly relevant nation. They either don't compete or they're nowhere close to the best. The thing is, because Korea has all the leverage in League of Legends, one, they have Faker, two, they even have all the imports everyone wants, and then three, they've got the best teams in the world. Like, these things combined mean that if we ever went to an open circuit, I can tell you right now, a lot of these shenanigans would happen. They just happen behind closed doors. Like, I'll give you a couple of historical examples. Here's a little detail that's an open secret in the industry if you were in StarCraft 10 plus years ago, but a lot of fans won't be aware of this, and it'll shock you, which is, in the early days of StarCraft 2, one of the most hype early moments was MLG used to just be a North American tournament. And so initially it was just North Americans and the odd European who got to fly there because his team had money. And then suddenly, in like 2012 and 2013, they started to bring in, 2011, they started to bring in like Boxer from Korea. Then they're bringing like MC. I can tell you all that happened behind the scenes was they had to go to those orgs. And this is the joke of what esports was like back then, boys. Even though first place in those MLGs was $5,000, there were times they paid 3 times that to get Boxer to come to the tournament because he was the draw. So the joke is, in that analogy, doesn't he make money set? But it does, because that's if that guy walks through the door, it changes the whole game of what that event is. Things like that would happen. I can tell you back in the day, it was very interesting which big orgs accepted IEM invites and which ones didn't. Like, spoiler, you know, it's T1 were a fuck ton of those Western ones. They would come to Katowice, bro. I imagine they got a very sweetheart deal. Let's just say that, like a fucking excellent deal where they, again, maybe they were just directly paid to even attend. That's totally plausible. Because, again, they are like the box office draw that you want to have at the event. So it's worth it, actually, as a marketing budget. You just pay them to come. So first of all, there'd be some of that. There'd be like who essentially can court the teams. I can tell you this used to happen in Counter-Strike until last year, because until last year we used to just have an open invite system where the team could invite someone. So they could invite a wash team, by the way, if they had legendary players. We now have a system where it's mandated by the game that it has to be like world rankings. You have to invite them by. You can't be biased in that sense. So first of all, I think you'd get a little bit of that. And then lastly, I'll just throw this out there. I'll tell you the weirdest angle of all that you're not even ready for. There there might even be a consideration for Korean teams, for example, as to which event they would choose to attend, based on things like, does our sponsor give a fuck about that country? That's real. Like, you have to remember, like, if I'm SK Telecom, do I really care about going to Brazil? I don't know. It depends if specifically T1 the org has Brazilian fans. You know what I mean? Like, there's things that otherwise we would just think of it as an esports tournament. What's the prize purse? Who's attending? Is this worth winning? There's also weird considerations. So actually, I think what I would say finally about this topic is, this is why in real life sports aren't as simple as, hey, we've got a cool tournament, do you want to play? There's a million business, cultural, political. It's Game of Thrones, isn't it? There's so many things behind the scenes, because as we pointed out here, the real question is, who has the power? Who gets to say?
And that's why the Super League, kind of like for football, was so crazy as well, because that was trying to slash through every bit of red tape possible. And while there might have been some bonuses, like, that was really treading on a lot of toes.
For sure.
The thing which is really going to be interesting is the more that we move away from a franchise, as Peter said, the fact that we have an open circuit and also a franchise doesn't just affect stuff like broadcast and like the broadcast partners we have as well. The problem with the franchise versus the TO is that, I mean, for the first time, it feels like Riot are allowing things to be overlapping in terms of games. We obviously, these events which are happening right now in terms of ENC, WC, whatever, they don't qualify to the Riot International circuit, so that obviously the regular season's there take precedence. But I mean, if it does move towards a scene where, you know, it is more of an open circuit there, all of those tournament organizers, presuming that there are going to be different ones, which then work in a larger circuit towards a larger international goal, they need to get some very experienced people in from other scenes, because if they're not used to dealing with your KeSPAs, with your Chinese teams as well, because you need to deal with all of them, it's going to be a mess for the first, year or two. It's going to be a mess.
I mean, all I would say for that is, like, don't talk. Be clear about which Chinese government, you know, authority you're talking to, right? Because there's a lot of overlap, and it's a very let's say complicated political issue that, you know, it's far out, you know, it's maybe not, we don't have time to talk about for the show, but all I would say is there's competing interests for who gets to write the legislation for esports and that kind of thing in China right now, and it's a debate that is ongoing, definitely behind the scenes. I'll leave it at that for that. But what I would say that the interesting thing is for these is that they don't apply roster locks, right? So I mean the EWC qualifiers, right? So you see Shio playing on shifters for this tournament, right?
Yes.
But as far as I know, like, he
can't join for LEC. No.
Yeah, he can't join for LEC because we're outside the window. Are we going to see these tournaments where you have a shifters with Shio, you know, playing in one tournament, and a shifters with? Oh,
we finally got back to sister teams. We're going to have like Heretics, like orange, and Heretics black, you know, or whatever their colors are, you know.
I assume I cannot imagine a world where shifters roster into summer is not with Shio. But let's say, for instance, you just wanted to take a break as G2, right? You wanted to take a break, you've just been to MSI, but let's say Caps and Han Summer decide they don't want to take a break. You know, can they go play for Fnatic? No, okay. Can they go play for Navi or something? You know, they never play for Fnatic, but can they go play for Navi for a tournament? You know, there's nothing in the rules.
That'll depend on their team. That'll depend on their team contract at that point, unless, like Ellie said, if their contract says something about, like, you know, Riot events, and obviously this isn't it's not a Riot Central event. Does it count that way? It's gonna. That's what I mean, right? With this kind of topic, there's so much tape which is kind of propping up the current circuit right now, which we just don't know how we have to cut through it.
But I mean, obviously G2 have solid financials, right? But let's imagine a Brazilian team, right? A Brazilian team wants to go and play in a tournament. I'm being offered by an NA team, right? $200,000. Right, $100,000 to play in this tournament. One of my players. We want to loan your player for 1 month. We're going to pay you $200,000. You know, will a team be able to turn that down? You know, are there rules against loans? You know, there's nothing that says that you can't, right? So I mean, that's where I think we'll see the more interesting nuances. And yes, as you say, you need people with proper expertise, and not from conventional sports, from other esports that understand this, because, you know, we're in untested waters right now, and people might think, oh, you know, nobody's going to ban Faker from playing if he goes to this tournament to get in defiance of KeSPA. Well, let me tell you like this: in the history of football, we're going to mention football, players have been banned. For sure. Like, players have been banned, like, especially English football players. You know, they're like some of the best English football players of all time in the 1950s, best of the era in the 50s and 60s, were told that they could not play for England because they accepted professional contracts in defiance of the English FA. you know.
Rugby
And so
was similar for like you can't play for national teams if you don't play within some regions as well. So there
Exactly,
there are English, New Zealand, Welsh players that went outside the region for better contracts elsewhere, and then they couldn't play for the national team.
Yeah.
This has happened in some. I mean, I don't know how it applied to league in general, right? Because the money is very, very different. But it has happened in traditional sports.
Yeah.
All right, what we will do is, since we lived up to the name, we will actually take one topic we were going to do. It's a very general one that we can easily read. We'll tank that for next week because that's actually a pretty good one. That will be the end of this episode. If you would like to submit a take that may indeed be one we discuss on a future episode, just subscribe to the Last Free Nation Discord. There'll be a channel that'll be available there. Shut up and scale. Put your topic in there and see if in the future we talk about it.